Now, for this quick reminder, we'll be taking your calls over the next hour at 1-877-Newsmax. That's 1-877-639-7629. Let's go in depth now with our panel. Skyping in from Raleigh, North Carolina, the director of the Voter Integrity Project there, Jay DeLancy. Also via Skype from Colorado, my old colleague on Capitol Hill, former U.S. Congressman and a 2008 Republican candidate for president, Tom Tancredo. Gents, it's great to have you both on Newsmax Prime. Jay, we both go back a long way. Jay and Tom, I've known you for several years. And Jay, first to you, the leftist media jumped on the court opinion calling the North Carolina voter ID law racist. For example, comedian John Oliver on HBO tackled the issue this way.
They didn't just go with their gut and think it would be discriminatory. They got the spreadsheets, crunched the numbers, and they knew it would be. I don't know how you did it, North Carolina, but I think you officially moneyballed racism. Forget first in flight. Your new state motto should be North Carolina, ignorance at its smartest.
So there it is, just a laugh a nanosecond, but this whole deal, I mean, you take a look at when we were growing up and Democrats dominated the legislature, they had a majority of votes and they regularly rolled Republicans. Heck, when we were an undergraduate, the program at NC State, there were only, like 3 Republicans in the state Senate back then. This notion that somehow one political party has an advantage over another in a legislative setting, and somehow that's wrong, that's just absurd.
Well, JD, it's only wrong when Republicans have the upper hand. Let's face it. They called us racist by ignoring all of the facts in the case. And that's how they came to that conclusion. They read the minds, these 3 lawyers wearing robes. They were able to read the mind of the entire legislature. But the ruling is a work of art because they also, at one point, they back off and say, but we're not calling anyone per se racist. We're just saying they're racist as a whole. So these 3 people have superpowers. We're able to read the intent of the legislature. It's amazing.
So they ought to get off the bench at the Fourth Circuit Court and go to the Hall of Justice and become super friends. Tom Tancredo, this going on in North Carolina, sadly, it's not just North Carolina. This is happening nationwide.
It is indeed, and the courts have either thrown out or severely restricted voter ID laws in several states. As those appeals work their way to the Supreme Court, if there's nothing else that this tells us all, it is the importance of this next presidential election. Because, of course, that election will determine the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court for a long time to come. And if we fail in our attempt to have a good constitutional president in office, which, of course, Hillary Clinton is not, then we will pay the price forever. And this is why, when we talk about people who are the never Trumpers, how stupid it is for you to actually pursue that line if you care at all about the Constitution and about this country's future.
Gentlemen, let's go to the phones and see what our fellow Americans have to say watching Newsmax TV tonight at 1-877-Newsmax. Joining us from Sterling, Michigan, Arnie is on the phone. Arnie, welcome to Newsmax Prime.
Thank you very much, and I'm a leftover from your last call. Thank you for your time. I want to respond to Steve, and I do believe we are at war, and there are people on your television show.
Oh, my goodness. Go ahead, Arnie.
They're saying for him to be careful. I say, Mr. Trump, please wise up. I am one of your donors. I donate money to you every month, and you are wasting our money by defending these statements that you make. Loose lips sink ships. Please stop saying things that you do not have pre-approved before they're saying.
Arnie, we appreciate your perspective, and we'll let you know that in just a few minutes we're expecting Mr. Trump to address a rally in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. If we have a chance, we'll take a look at some of what he has to say tonight. But let's get back, apart from the vagaries of a campaign, we're dealing with the election process. And it's amazing how candid the left is. For example, Professor of Law and Political Science at UC Irvine, Richard Hasen, was on NPR, National Public Radio, on Sunday, and he says of these rulings, there were clear actions, quote, against the views of Democrats. Listen.
These are all laws that are passed by Republican legislatures against the views of Democrats. And that's something that the Fourth Circuit, in its opinion, struggled with and said, look, if you target a party knowing that this is the party that is favored by minority voters, that's race discrimination, even if it's not driven by racial hatred or racial animus.
You know, I love it when the pseudo-intellectuals try to rationalize partisanship, Tom Tancredo. The notion that they, just like Jay said earlier, that they have some ability to look inside the minds and the hearts of the Republican majority of the General Assembly in North Carolina is mind-boggling. It is sad. It is stupid.
And here's a big problem, and I'm sure that your other guests there will agree with me on this, and that is that the wording of the three-judge panel in North Carolina is very important and very scary, because what it says is that the laws were passed with racially, with intent to discriminate, passed with intent to discriminate. Now, why that is really scary, if that's allowed to stand, is that opens the door then for the Justice Department to come into North Carolina and any other state and reimpose those restrictions that were thrown out by the Supreme Court in 2013. And those restrictions would say that all these states have to go to the federal government and ask permission to change any of their state voting laws. And so that's another thing that emanates out of these decisions.
Well, let me turn to Jay DeLancy about that.
The Justice Department wants to do.
Jay, knowing that Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, who basically just takes orders from the White House, is a native North Carolinian, do you expect her to lower the boom and start to scrutinize and send Department of Injustice attorneys back into North Carolina?
Well, it's my reading on it that the plaintiffs actually wanted to send federal election monitors into North Carolina, like the 60s again, like Jim Crow, that old Democrat racist named Jim Crow was back in action. So they asked for that, and the court said no. So I'm hoping that means they're not going to reimpose Section 5, but I didn't see that, but I did see that the plaintiffs were certainly asking for it, to get as many eyes and ears in here, and that was denied.
Well, it would be nice to have eyes and ears that were impartial, but it seems like the fix is in, at least in terms of what these folks are saying. Hey, let's go back to the phones at 1-877-639-7629 to Newcastle, Ohio for Jim. Jim, welcome to Newsmax Prime.
Congratulations, JD. I see you finally got your own show.
That's right. 1 hour passed to the other, finished tag teaming with Steve, and now we're back on Prime. Your thoughts tonight, Jim?
Okay. I'm in favor of those voter ID laws. Of course, unfortunately, if we have those, the Democrats can't get all of the illegals and dead people to vote. They can't go from one voting place to another and vote several times in the same election, so I guess that's a disadvantage to them.
Well, let me go to Jay DeLancy, because aren't there some lawsuits being filed because of some curious actions taken in various counties in North Carolina by folks who man the election stations?
Well, there are some prosecutions going forward in one area, and we didn't file lawsuits, but we filed a petition for the state to investigate misbehavior by poll workers. And this is with voter ID. They were not checking ID.
Wow.
But now it's kind of moot.
Well, let's move out from the Carolinas to California. About a minute left, Tom Tancredo. What Jerry Brown signed into law in Sacramento, that essentially is going to let the left have non-citizens vote, is it not? We got about a minute.
Of course it is. And all these attempts by courts and the left to suggest that voter ID is discriminatory. Let me tell you, JD, once I suggested that I believe we should have mandatory civics education, pass the civics test in order to vote. And everybody said, oh my God, they went crazy. They said it was all Jim Crow and racist. I said, who's the racist here? I'm not suggesting only black people have to take the test. Everybody does. You're suggesting that black and brown people would flunk it in greater proportion. That's racist. It's also racist to suggest that a black or brown person can't figure out how to get a free ID in order to vote. They're too stupid to do it. Who's saying that? That's the left.
Yep,
That's
it is
racist.
the left. And to be continued. Tom Tancredo tonight from Colorado. Jay DeLancy checking in from North Carolina. Gentlemen, you have our thanks. When we come back, Wayne Allen Root, so stay tuned.